Okay, check. Roll up the sleeves. Let's get ready to do this. Let's see how long my poppy stays on. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to my studio. My name is Michael Markowsky, and today we are going to be recreating another painting by another one of my favorite artists. Today we're going to be looking at the art of Lawren Harris. Lawren Harris is one of the most important Canadian artists of all time, one of the great landscape painters of all time, and the number one he holds the current record for the most expensive painting ever sold by a Canadian artist, nearly double the price of the next artist who placed at number 2, Jean-Paul Riopelle, and is number 4 on that same list as well, and probably figures maybe in a third of the next 30, 40 of additional paintings after that. So he also happens to be the favorite artist of the American comedian, Steve Martin. So we'll talk all about that here as we recreate this painting on today's episode. And we're filming it live. So if you're watching this after it was recorded, you can use this time-stamped chapters down below. And you'll see that we're going to start with our image transfer in just a couple seconds here. We're going to get the canvas stained with a little bit of color. Then we're going to talk about Lawren Harris and his biography and the group of 7, of which he was one of the most important members. Then we're going to, I don't know if we'll do an underpainting. Then we're going to work on the background and foreground, background, foreground. Today's painting is a little bit more complex than the last few ones we've done, so it won't surprise me if we push about 3 hours to get this painting finished. And at that point, we'll do a little side-by-side comparison at the very end, and we'll see how they turned out. So, just as a quick reminder to hit the subscribe button, the notification bell, so that you know when upcoming videos are happening, and like the video right now. If you're watching, like it. It really helps get other people for this video to show up on other people's feeds, and for this channel to continue to grow. Because wouldn't it be great if everyone was making a painting, if everyone knew how to paint? Imagine how much better the world would be if we had more positive ways to communicate amongst one another. And if you want to support the channel financially, as many of you have done, and I really appreciate your generous donations over the years, there's the PayPal link in the description below. You can contribute through the Super Chat, or if you want to contact me through the Facebook group or my website, all those links are down below. And while it's on the top of my tongue here, there is the Facebook group here, and I encourage you to join the Facebook group, upload your version of today's painting to the Facebook group, and once a month, next weekend, I will go through all the work that's on here and give people feedback, free feedback, to help people get better at painting, because that's usually what people are most interested in doing, right? So that's pretty much one of the most popular things that we do around here. So if you haven't already, do that right now. Okay, let's go right into it. So today, what we're going to do is we are going to transfer an image onto the canvas. Now, you could trace this, or you could draw the image of the painting out onto the canvas yourself. But I've done an outline for you, which you can download for free from the Dropbox, and then you can print this out. So let me show you where you can do that. So there's a link, I think it's maybe the first or second link in the video description below, to our Master Study Dropbox. And you'll see at the very top our most simple paintings are here. The ones that are based on and celebrating various different artists from around the world are the next ones here that begin with a letter. And then the ones that begin with numbers, there's, I don't know, 200 different folders down here from artists from all over the world, from various different periods of time, all the way up to artists that are living today versus artists that lived 500 plus years ago. So they're all in here. But what we're going to look at is this one right here. ZO2. Let's go in here. Come on. You're going to see these 4 files. And again, in here we have your outline as a JPEG and a PDF. You have your original painting by Lawren Harris. And you have this little cheat sheet I created that gives you a little bit of tips on how to mix some of these colors and my suggestions as to what colors go where. So let's get this outline onto the canvas here. So you'll see that I've just printed my outline from the Dropbox onto a regular piece of photocopy paper. And I'm going to transfer it onto this 9x12 sized canvas panel or canvas board. And you can buy this exact same brand in the description below. I recommend it because I've been using them for a while and I think they are superior to the ones you can get at the dollar store. Having said that, the ones at the dollar store do work pretty good. These come out to about twice the price, so $2 a canvas when you buy them in bulk versus the $1 at the dollar store. And I think that's a pretty good deal because I do think they're twice as good. Okay, so I'm going to put that roughly in the center there. And just use a bit of tape. To get that in place. Okay. And then I'm going to use some of this carbon transfer paper. And you can see some of these have been used many times. I think I could still get a few lines out of this one here. So I'm going to put this under here, and you'll see one side is kind of darker and shinier than the other. This one's kind of got a little bit more of a gray. It's a little more obvious when it hasn't been drawn on dozens of times, but I think it's important to know that you can use the same sheet over and over and over again until it no longer has any graphite or carbon paper on there. So let's go through this here. It's also a good idea after you've just done a few little lines, just check. Oh, yeah, it is in fact working. Okay, good, good, good. I can't tell you how many times I have done this and gotten all the way through and realized I had the carbon paper upside down the whole time. And I got to do it all over again. So, save yourself the agony and the frustration. And I'm just going to kind of quickly do some of these lines. I don't really care if I get it all in place. And you'll see the difference when I peel this away. I'm mostly just interested in getting the basic composition in place. Okay. Will be about another 1 minute here. Some people will spend a long time doing this, and I think it's a bit of a waste of time because we're going to paint over everything here, right? So all those pretty lines that you spent all that time doing disappear. You can see I'm not really obeying all these little reflections of the trees in the water. And I think that's good enough, right? I just want to know where those trees actually are and where the gap is. And then after that, it's not going to be all that much more helpful. Okay, there's Pascaline saying, hello, it's midnight here in the United Kingdom on the other side of the ocean. There's Blue Dog Fine Art saying hello. It's 5 o'clock here in Alberta, and there's M. Taylor saying hello. So, and there's many more people, but have yet to be in the chat, because I know a lot of people are very interested in making today's painting. So I imagine there's going to be more people painting than chatting away in today's episode, which is good. That's awesome. I love it when people attempt these paintings. So let's go to the next step. So now that we got our image on the canvas, let's stain the canvas with a little bit of color, and we're going to do what the Italians have done for over 600 years, is we're going to use a color as our priming layer in what is the Italians called the Imprimatura, my favorite word of all time, Imprimatura. And many different ways of doing this. I've talked at length in the past about it, so I'm not going to bore you all again, but essentially, traditionally, artists have put down a kind of a rusty red color. I'm just going to use a bit of a different approach. I'm going to use a warm yellow, just because I can get it right out of the tube and immediately start to work on it. Now, if you're wondering, what is this tube of paint? Well, this tube of paint is this right here. It's by Amsterdam. It's the Azo Yellow Deep. Now, I'm not paid by them. I'm not sponsored by them. No one's given me free materials or encouraged me to use anything. This is just a student grade paint that I've been using for teaching for the past 15 years, and it works excellent. We've done 250 plus paintings using this same material, so it works. It's guaranteed to work. Now, you know, it's not the best paint, but you certainly get a pretty good value for bang for the buck here, because a tube of paint like this costs about $13 Canadian, which is like $1.50 American, or, you know, probably like $9 American. This is the 250 milliliter size, and you can get a whole all of these paints all together for about, you know, 125 bucks, and this will last you, you know, at each tube you could probably get 50, 60 paintings out of it, and for many people that's enough to keep you busy for a year plus if you're making a painting every week or two, right? That's a pretty good investment for a hobby, to be able to keep you busy for about a year for 150 bucks or less, right? And there's Holly saying hello. Just a quick hello to say hi to everybody. Hi, Holly. Okay, so if you don't have this Amsterdam paint, or you want to use a different brand, whoops, I'll just show you a few different options. You got the golden, which is a little bit more expensive, much more expensive, and a little bit better. You've got the Artist's Loft from Michael's Art Supply. You've got Winsor & Newton. You got Liquitex. You've got Buzz, Peebo, Holbein, Daler-Rowney, Fevicryl, Nova Color, Chromacolor, and not Museum Color from Toronto, because they put white in the paint, and it drives me crazy because you can't get a black using this brand of paint. So again, if you're finding you cannot mix a black with the colors we're doing here, then that's probably the issue. And let me know in the comments below if that is indeed happening to you. Okay, so let's get some yellow out here. And I'm going to put a bit of water. That was a bit more than I had planned on. Just get a bit of that out. Okay. And just stirring this up. This is the only time I ever put water into my acrylic paint, because it works really well with this, because this is a plaster gesso. It's been pre-gessoed, and gesso is essentially just paint that's got plaster powder in it. It isn't exactly that, but it's essentially, for our purpose, that's what it is. And if you've ever broken your arm and had one of those old-timey plaster casts on it, and you got it wet and it started to get soft and stinky, you know how well plaster absorbs water, right? So We're staining this canvas. Just like that. Okay. And then I like just to kind of go over here and clean this surface up a little bit. Just this also just helps get that paint into all the little weaves and nooks and crannies, so it's as smooth a surface as possible. I personally like painting with as little texture as possible, but I know that's not necessarily how everybody likes to paint, so there we go. That first step down. And I'm going to move this fellow out of the way. Where can I put that fellow? And just before I move on to the next step, I'm going to put some more paint on my, or put some paint on my palette. Okay, so I'm going to put my warm yellow in here. Holly says, thank you for what you do, Michael. I've been thinking about your military illustrations. Maybe one year we could do Molly Lamb Bowback on Remembrance Day week. We did do a Molly Lamb Bowback painting, but I really like her art a lot, so we could always do another painting of hers, yeah. This year I'm so busy trying to get my graphic novel done that I've kind of scaled back the number of episodes that I do, like on holidays and such. So tomorrow is Remembrance Day here in Canada, and in the United States it's called Veterans Day, and it's a time that when we honor the sacrifices of our men and women who've served in uniform at home and abroad. And the artist that we are painting today, Lawren Harris, was also a Canadian war artist, which is a program I had the honor of participating in a few years ago. So it's pretty cool to have to be in the company of this artist, although we're definitely in different stratas of Lawren Harris being one of the great artists of all time. So it's humbling to mention myself in the same sentence as Lawren Harris. So I won't go too much further than that. Okay. Great. Okay. Oh, and there's a donation. Thank you, Holly. I appreciate that. Holly contributed in the super chat function. Awesome. Okay. And I also put a little Q&A here. They just introduced a new feature, so I thought I would try it. And I just asked a question: who's your favorite Canadian artist? I'm curious to see how that works. So if you can see where that Q&A button is, and if you want to try entering a response there, that'd be awesome. Oh, and there's Maria says hello. Maria says Emily Carr is my favorite Canadian artist, but I don't know many. That's cool. So, okay, let's move on to our next step here, wherever that next step might be. Okay, so what I want to do is talk a little bit about who today's artist was or is, because even though he passed away, 50 years ago, he remains a great artist. Does that? I always get confused by that. How do? Anyway, it's a painting class, not a language English class. So let's go right up top here. So today's artist is Lawren Harris, or Lawren Stewart Harris, born in 1855 and dies in 1970 at age 84. And really the art that Lawren Harris is most known for was mostly created during the period from about like 1910 to like 1930. So for about a 20-year period, he created some incredible landscape paintings, many of them featuring mountains that he saw on his trips to the Canadian Arctic, as well as out west in the Rocky Mountains. And after the 1930s, his style changed completely, and we'll get to that in a moment. You know, let me see, where should we? So, Lawren Harris is born into a very wealthy family. The Harris family is noted as being one of the wealthiest families in Ontario, and the Harris family was involved in the manufacture of farm machinery equipment. At one point, the Harris Ferguson Company, or the Macy Ferguson or the Macy Harris Company, sorry, was the largest manufacturer of farm equipment in the entire English or British, British Empire. Blah. Yeah, so you can imagine, you know, there's a lot of colonies that were at one point in the British Empire back 125 years ago or so, and Lawren Harris's father and the company that he co-founded was producing the majority of that farm equipment, right? So they amassed a vast fortune. That company actually still exists today as Macy Ferguson, and is now owned by an American consortium. But that money certainly allowed Lawren Harris to really explore his interests. His parents were supportive of his interest in art, and he studied for a time in Toronto and then moved to Berlin in 1904 when he would have been about 18 or 19 years old. And he arrives in Berlin 1904. He's there for 3 years, and that time he's in Berlin must have been a very interesting time for lots of different reasons. On one side, well, let's start one at a time. So what's interesting is he goes to Berlin and he's studying relatively traditional academic painting techniques from a number of fairly well-known German artists, and yet at that same time, there's also the growing, I wouldn't say influence, but growing, well, I guess maybe influence of European avant-garde painting, which is spreading very quickly, mostly from France, and then kind of moving outward, and Germany, and really your main centers of like kind of European avant-garde would have been like Rome, Berlin, Paris, and to a certain extent London, but really Paris is where it's at. But one of the things that happened kind of, you know, about a decade before Lawren Harris gets to Berlin is that there's a very controversial exhibition that is mounted in Berlin, in which the art of Edvard Munch, you know, the guy who did the Scream, right? That a bunch of work of his is exhibited in Berlin, and it's almost immediately taken down. And because of that, because it was sort of seen as being like ugly and, you know, strange and weird, and because of that, a number of teachers, including Franz Skarbina, who is one of the main teachers of Lawren Harris, and even though he painted in a very academic traditional style, he was you know, he was one of those guys he felt just that the freedom of expression trumped everything, and was very supportive of Munch and avant-garde art. Again, even though he didn't make that kind of art himself, his art was much more like kind of urban impressionism, and the same kind of art that maybe the Ashcan school of painting American artists began doing around this time as well. But long story short, Skarbina founds a group called the Berlin Secession, which is really kind of similar to what the Impressionists did in Paris about 10 years before the Berlin Secession, in which they got fed up with not having their paintings exhibited as part of the yearly exhibitions that the Academy would have. So they seceded and formed their own group that allowed anybody to submit paintings to, and they would be shown. So I think it's very interesting that Lawren Harris is taking classes from someone who really is really important in German and particularly Berlin art history, who's both a very well-known academic painter, but a very important supporter of avant-garde art. And there's also a lot of discussion in Germany about trying to find an art that is authentically and uniquely German, because a lot of the academic art and academic painting traditions are kind of imported from France, or even earlier from Rome and Florence, and have been imported to France and then imported to Germany. So you have a lot of people in Germany who are like, why are we painting like French people who are trying to paint like Raphael and Leonardo, you know, these Italian artists? Why aren't we trying to paint like the great German artists of the past, or trying to find our own unique way of painting? And that kind of theme of trying to find a uniquely national art is something that sticks in Lawren Harris's mind for really the rest of his life. And he brings that back to Canada with him when he returns in 1908. The other thing that's sort of obviously happening at the same time in Europe, and particularly in Germany, is the rise of nationalism, not just in art, but in politics. And of course, this eventually leads to World War I. It eventually continues on all the way through to World War II. So there was this kind of bubbling up of discontent in the art world that was also reflected in other spheres of German society, for better or worse, right? But anyway, as I said, Lawren Harris returns to Toronto in 1908, and he joins this group, the Arts and Letters Club of Toronto, which was, you know, had an actual building, and people would go there and hang out. It was sort of like in New York, they had the Art Students League, I think it was called, where Jackson Pollock and a number of other important American artists used to spend time. And you know, like those sort of clubs, gentlemen clubs, were much more common, you know, and today they're very far and few between. I'm sure they still exist, like the Knights Templar or whatever, but they certainly don't have the influence that they once had. But in those meetings and in gatherings where these guys used to go and hang out and smoke cigars and drink whiskey and argue about philosophy and such, there would also be you know, monthly exhibitions. And so you had not only just painters, but you had poets and writers and critics and historians all kind of hanging out together. And these were important kind of gathering places for the intellectual community at the time in Toronto, which Toronto was not, you know, the cosmopolitan center it is now. And we talked about this just last week when we looked at A.Y. Jackson, became a really good friend of Lawren Harris and future member of the Group of Seven together. So while he's at this Arts and Letters Club, he's exhibiting his work, and another artist, J.E.H. MacDonald, who we'll look at in 3 weeks. We're going to do a painting of his. And through that, they discover one another, and they discover they have like-minded interests, that they're both equally fascinated by the Canadian landscape, and they're both sort of thinking about how we can form some sort of uniquely Canadian art. And the two of them start going on trips to parks outside of Toronto, because at that time there's still quite a lot of vast space where, you know, there's maybe little tiny towns and stops on the train. You could get off and within 20 steps find yourself in the middle of a deep, deep forest. So they did that a number of times, and that also becomes a very key feature of the other friends that start to kind of gravitate to that small around Harris and MacDonald. And then there is a very important kind of moment in Canadian art history where Lawren Harris and J.H. MacDonald take a train and they go down to... Where do I have? Thought I had that all queued up. Oops. Okay, so they go down to the Albright Knox Museum in Buffalo, New York. They take the train down there in 1913, and they go to see an exhibition of Scandinavian art that is mounted in that museum. And that's one of the first times that Scandinavian art, and Scandinavia is Norway, Denmark, are Sweden and Finland part of Scandinavia? I apologize, I can't remember, but this is really the first time a lot of that art has been surveyed in North America, and it makes a huge impact on those two artists. They are carrying around this exhibition catalog that they bought while they were there. Now, exhibition catalogs back in the day didn't have photographs. They would have, you know, just be basically the list of the paintings there. So sometimes they would do little drawings of the paintings in the margins. And this gives you an idea of the art that was on display. And a lot of the paintings that we see here are by the artist Edvard Munch, right? Again, think of, I know that story I mentioned about the cause of that whole Berlin secession movement was because of the rejection of this very same artist's artwork 20 years before this, or yeah, 20 years or so before this moment, maybe 30 years before this. And so that is probably Edvard Munch would have been the most avant-garde, most unique artist that they would have seen as part of this exhibition. A lot of the other art in here would have been what we might call like, you know, not neoclassic, or like similar to the pre-Raphaelite paintings, which is mostly a British English art movement that tried to kind of paint like Renaissance paintings, but featured themes and stories from mostly English history, as well as like illustrating scenes from Shakespeare, etc. So, but in this exhibition, we don't really see it in here. I wasn't able to really find too many images, but there is a lot of landscape painting by Scandinavian artists, and that really clicked with Lawren Harris and J.H. MacDonald, because, you know, the landscape of Norway and Denmark is not too dissimilar from the landscape in Canada. There's mountains and big trees and often lots of snow. And you know, while there was lots of other art that MacDonald and particularly Harris had seen on their travels around the world, a lot of the stuff that was going on elsewhere in the world was being made by artists like Matisse and Claude Monet, and that, you know, often featured paintings of the French Riviera, the, you know, the Mediterranean, where you have a very different kind of light and often very little to no snow, right? There's palm trees and people on the beach and women walking around with parasols and in these like big grassy fields, maybe rain on the streets of Paris, but not a lot of snow. So when they saw the paintings by these Scandinavian artists, Harris and MacDonald were like, wow, these guys are kind of doing something similar to what we're doing, and seems very unique to what's going on in Scandinavia. This is the key to what we want to do here in Canada. So that when they come back from Buffalo, New York to Toronto with that exhibition catalog that's full of notes and doodles, they are full of energy and excitement, and they want to really push forward a notion of what Canadian art is, or what it could be. So one of the things that Harris does, again, Lawren Harris, today's artist, was from a very wealthy family, and he decided to kind of put that money to use. And there was a lot of artists who were Canadian artists that were leaving Canada to go to Europe, to go to the United States, because as we talked about last week, there just wasn't a lot of collectors in Canada, and the art that those collectors, the few that existed, most of them were buying, you know, European art, you know, classical paintings from, you know, the Renaissance and Rococo, Baroque period. They weren't really interested in Canadian art. Canadian art kind of seemed to them as kind of like, you know, backward and boring and not something you would impress a visitor from London, England with, right? Or New York City, showing them a painting of a Canadian artist who's like, oh my goodness, like how you want to show them something like, oh, we're wealthy and we're cosmopolitan, so here's our painting by Monet, right? Or Raphael, or whatever it is. That, so you had all these kind of artists in Canada really struggling to make a living. So Harris decides, one of the things I'm going to do is I'm going to build this building, which he very cleverly entitled the Studio Building. And it had, I think there were 12 studios, or maybe 10 studios in this building, all of which had these gigantic windows, right? So this is a building built for painters. And one of the reasons he's building it is he wants to prevent these Canadian artists from leaving. He wants to have like a center where the greatest Canadian artists of his time can live and work, and at as low of rent as he could possibly charge to keep them in Canada. And one of the very first artists that Harris invites to occupy a space in his newly finished studio building is the artist A.Y. Jackson. And we did an A.Y. Jackson painting last week. A.Y. Jackson is a Canadian artist from Montreal, and he was, you know, within weeks of moving to New York City himself, Lawren Harris hears about that, and he's like, oh my goodness, one of the best painters in Montreal is going to leave and go to New York? Okay, we've got to get that guy here before he leaves, because what a devastating blow that would be to the art community. So he convinces, him and J.H. MacDonald convince A.Y. Jackson to move to Toronto and take up a space in that building. And they pair them with another artist, another young, well, another artist in his early 30s, Tom Thompson. And we did this painting just a few weeks before that, right? So, but, and so the two of them share studio number 1 in the studio building. And that becomes a very important relationship in Canadian art history. A.Y. Jackson and Tom Thompson would then spend some time up in Algonquin Park painting together, and those really A.Y. Jackson is showing a lot of techniques to Tom Thompson, and Tom Thompson absorbs that and becomes this incredible kind of the soul of that group. Unfortunately, World War One breaks out at around this time, and A.Y. Jackson enlists in the Canadian Army and is shipped off to England and eventually to France. Tom Thompson, however, stays behind and spends the next few years up in Algonquin Park painting. We talked about why he was there, why wasn't he in the war? We're still to this day not exactly sure. There's lots of conflicting opinions about why he didn't. Did he enlist and tried to enlist and got rejected several times, as some have claimed, or was he a fierce anti-war figure that refused to go to war and decided to hide in the forest? We don't know. But anyway, you have Lawren Harris himself also enlists in World War One and goes to France. Lawren Harris, because his family is so wealthy, is sort of given a relatively cushy placement in the Canadian military during the war, so he never goes to the front. A.Y. Jackson himself, however, turns down Harris's offer to give him that cushy job and does actually go to the front, where he is injured in an explosion and shot. Well, he's shot, and then there's an explosion, and he spends a few months in England recovering. Both of those two artists, though, in 1917 become members of the newly formed War Artist Program. So Lawren Harris, of which here's some of the paintings. Well, let me make those bigger. Lawren Harris is out there making paint. I don't think there's any of his war art here. Lawren Harris isn't really known for the paintings he made in while he was a member of the armed forces, however, unlike A.Y. Jackson, who has a number of very famous paintings that he made during World War One. But that War Artist Program is still in existence today, and as I mentioned at the top of the show, is a program I had the great honor of participating in myself, and I got to go up to the actual North Pole and become the first artist to make a painting at the North Pole, and I got to fly around in a CF-18 Hornet fighter jet plane and become the first person to make drawings while flying faster than the speed of sound. So those were two incredible experiences that I had an opportunity to do because of my involvement in the War Artist Program. And unlike Lawren Harris and A.Y. Jackson, however, I was never enlisted. I'm a civilian. I was never actually part of the military. Back then, you did have to be a member of you had to be enlisted servicemen to participate in the program. And since, I think, 1960, they expanded it to allow women to participate in the program as well. What else do I want to say? So, while Lawren Harris and A.Y. Jackson are away fighting in World War One, Tom Thompson, as I mentioned, is in Algonquin Park painting. Tom Thompson disappears and turns up dead in early July of 1917, and that was a devastating blow for all of those for that small circle of friends, because they had seen Tom Thompson, who was mostly self-taught artist, but had become kind of the spiritual force behind that group of friends. He was the the farm kid that spent a lot of time out in the wilderness fishing and camping and painting, and was a hardy canoeist, outdoorsman. And so these Other artists, many of whom were a little bit more of city boys, really saw Tom as sort of this kind of iconic, almost mythical Canadian figure. And he's seen that way today, but that's often the way that they spoke and wrote about him after Tom died, as this guy that sort of represented the spiritual ideal of how many Canadians see themselves, right? Whether you grew up in the city or not, we kind of we like to think of ourselves as having this direct connection to nature. Anyway, A.Y. Jackson is a kind of an organizer figure who decides, you know what? Not only are we just going to exhibit together and be these good friends, but we should form our own movement. We should form a group like many of the groups, like the Berlin Secession that Harris had seen, or I mean, there's so many of them that were happening in Europe at the turn of the century, like the Fauves and the Futurists and the Cubists and all these sort of things. So they decide, we're going to form a group, and we're going to call it the Group of Seven, being 7 original artists who formed that group. What else do I want to say? Oh, I neglected to mention, so the studio building, if you're interested, woo, there's Toronto. Let's zoom out. There's North America. Let's zoom into, whoa, the city of Toronto. The studio building is in this ravine that, where did I just... And you can go visit it. It still exists today. You can't go inside of it. It's right next to the Bloor-Yonge train station, subway station. And maybe I'll just do a quick little street view here in case anyone's interested in visiting the studio building. Where so much... No, I want this. Right, so there's the studio building itself. Now, just as a quick little thing, Tom Thompson, who's I just mentioned, was part of that group who died in 1917. He had a little shack out back because Tom was not as successful as the other artists and couldn't afford the $22 a month rent to stay in that beautiful space. So instead, Lawren Harris was like, he's a great artist. It's just, I can't really afford to, or he probably could afford, but he just didn't want to support Tom completely. So he let him stay in this kind of, it was the old carpenter's shack that the carpenters used when they built the studio building. And it was right in behind here, and Tom stayed there. And Tom actually loved being in that space because it reminded him a lot of the cabin that he had sometimes stayed in when he was in Algonquin Park. And I think Tom was also felt quite insecure sharing a space with an artist like A.Y. Jackson, who had studied art formally and had traveled around Europe and, was there right next door to some other great Canadian artists, like J.B. Beatty, and who is another artist that was in that space? Not Beatty. Who's the other great? I have one of his books in the back here somewhere. A great landscape, figurative illustrator. Of course, it's going to escape me until 10 minutes after the show. Oh, where did I just saw his name here? Arthur Fleming. There we are. Arthur Fleming. Or Arthur Hemming. Who, if you ever go to the not the AGO, the ROM, the Royal Ontario Museum in Toronto, it's that one that's got that weird cube shape that's colliding into the front of the building. There's a couple of gorgeous Arthur Hemming paintings that are kind of nestled into the far corner. And Hemming was, you know, was maybe 20 years older than the rest of these guys, and they didn't really get along because Hemming had a very different approach to painting and attitude and philosophy of art. But again, I just think it's so fascinating. You have all of these characters sharing that space. It must have been one of the most interesting places to visit back in the day. What else do I want to mention before I move on? Okay, so let me just kind of go back here. So Lawren Harris, increasingly during the 1920s, his paintings start to become, they kind of go from, from paintings like this, which are very, you know, owe a great debt to the Scandinavian artists they had seen in Buffalo in 1913. So it goes from this type of painting to, let's say, this type of painting, where we have a much more stylized approach to landscape painting. And so this painting is done in the mid-1920s, and not too dissimilar in approach and style to the painting we're about to do today. But that is, you know, quite the transition to something where we see these shapes that are, you know, a lot of the detail has been removed. We have these much more almost like platonic surfaces, like the, you know, like Plato talking about these shapes, these that exist within everything, and trying to kind of get close to the essence of nature, I suppose you could say. And not only does he, so that's the kind of paintings that Harris is making throughout the 1920s. Those are the paintings that are the most popular, that he's most recognized for. But as we look down here, we see that this is the type of paintings from about 1930-31 on until Harris dies in 1970. Harris becomes very focused on these much more abstract paintings. Like, these are just wild. Like, such bizarre, I mean, I love these paintings, but certainly not the things that most people would associate with a former member of the Group of Seven. The Group of Seven really only lasted for about 8 years before it kind of eventually folded, and different artists kind of went in and out of the group. But these paintings are also inspired by Harris's interest in theosophy. And theosophy is, and I don't really know too much about the philosophy behind theosophy, but as far as I sort of understand, it's sort of like an amalgamation of a lot of different religions, although they don't really see it necessarily as a religion, but sort of taking some of the traditions and philosophy of Christianity, melding it with Hinduism and Buddhism, as well as some aspects of the occult. And this becomes really important to Lawren Harris. And again, I know very little of it to kind of talk about the influence it exerted on his art, but you can really see that his interest in theosophy also occurs while he's becoming fascinated with abstract painting. I should also say that around this time, I think it's 1934, is it 1934, 1936? 1934. Harris gets himself into a pickle. He falls in love with his best, well, I don't know if it was his best friend, but with his friend's wife, and leaves his own wife of 24 years and their 3 children, and marries this other woman, Bess, and while he's still married to his first wife. I mean, it's a huge scandal within the high society of Toronto at the time, so much so that Harris basically becomes an outcast and leaves Toronto really for good. He'd kind of visit infrequently over the remaining 40 years of his life, but he moves down to the United States. He goes to, I think, New Hampshire and then Santa Fe before eventually settling in Vancouver, where I'm filming live right now, in 1940. And so for the last 30 years of his life, Lawren Harris lives and works here in Vancouver. And really, that sort of really marks the end of, I mean, the group of seven had basically kind of parted ways 15 years before that, but that's really closes the book on that period in Canadian art history. It's pretty much a complete break from a lot of the relationships that he had in the art world out there. And it does sort of, he becomes quite more isolated when he's living in Vancouver. Now, he gets to know artists like Emily Carr, who live out in Victoria and would come into Vancouver frequently. So, and a number of other Group of Seven members do sort of visit him out there, A.Y. Jackson in particular. I don't really know too much about those final few years of Lawren Harris in Vancouver. However, it is, for the art world in Vancouver, it's a huge sort of, I don't know how to win, but you have really one of the most, by 1940, 1950, Lawren Harris is acknowledged as being one of the most important living Canadian artists. And now he's living in Vancouver, which back in the 1940s and 50s was, pretty much the edge of the world in terms of art, right? It's about as much of a backwater as you could possibly imagine. There's not that many people who are buying art in Toronto or Montreal. There's certainly not that many buying art in Vancouver at the time. So he really was able to kind of get away and kind of start a kind of new life for himself and really immerse himself in abstraction in a way that may have been a little bit more difficult for him to really do in Toronto, where he's surrounded by, a lot of his peers who were not as ready to embrace abstraction as Harris had done. In fact, one of the things that happens, right towards the end of Tom Thompson's life in 1917 is there is quite a concern amongst that group of friends that Tom might be experimenting with cubism and might be interested in exploring more avant-garde approaches to painting. That J.H. MacDonald is writing A.Y. Jackson in France and at the front and being like, yeah, Tom is starting to kind of, I think he's kind of more interested in abstraction, and they kind of take that quite seriously because they're like, this is the kind of soul of our group, and he might abandon the kind of the approach to painting we've all been using for the past 5 or 6 years. Like, oh, that's going to be awkward. So I'm sure that was in the back of Harris's own mind 20 years later when he himself kind of moves into abstraction. He's like, oh, I bet you my friends are not too impressed with what I'm up to lately. Let me see. Long story short, Lawren Harris is buried on the grounds of the McMichael Canadian Art Collection in Kleinsburg, which is about an hour's north of Toronto. It's one of the great art museums in all of Canada, and besides the National Gallery in Ottawa and the Art Gallery of Ontario in Toronto, the McMichael has the largest collection of a group of 7 paintings. The only other, and sort of probably in a close number 4 to the National Gallery, the Art Gallery of Ontario, and the McMichael, in terms of collectors of art by Lawren Harris is the comedian Steve Martin. And Steve Martin, let me see, do I have... I'm not going to play this video, but you can... There are clips of Steve Martin talking about his love of Lawren Harris, and he just finds the approach that Harris had, these very smooth kind of shapes and kind of majestic, almost mythical mountains, to be very inspiring, calming. The colors are just gorgeous and radiate energy. And it's something that Steve Martin has been collecting for over 20 years now. And Steve Martin now has the largest private collection of Lawren Harris paintings of anyone in the world. And about 4 years ago, was it? There was a large exhibition of Lawren Harris paintings. Many of them were loaned by Steve Martin. Steve Martin was there for the exhibition opening and shot some video touring the show. So just lastly, before I move on, just as I might have mentioned earlier, that Lawren Harris has produced 2 of the 5 most expensive paintings ever sold that were produced by Canadian artists. He still has the ranked #1 here with a painting that sold for $11.2 million. Followed, behind by Jean-Paul Riopel. We did a Riopel painting a year and a half ago for $7.5. Riopel is definitely the most important Quebecois artist in Canadian history. I feel comfortable saying that. Paul Kane, we did this painting maybe about a year ago. Paul Kane being really one of the most important early Canadian artists. And here we have another Lawren Harris painting. And Jeff Wall, #5 on that list, is a contemporary living artist who's a photographer who makes these paintings that are staged photographs with actors, and they're I love Jeff Wall's work. And this painting sold for $3.6 million several years ago. So, pretty good company for Lawren Harris to be in, and the fact that he's still at the top of this list, 8 years after it was sold, I think just says something about the enduring appreciation that people feel towards the art of Lawren Harris. Yeah, so I think that's enough of me talking away. I think it's time to make a painting. Wow, look at all these comments in here. So I'm gonna start painting here, and then I'll take a look at some of these comments here after our first break. So our next step usually is doing a little bit of an underpainting, which is one way of maybe doing like an underdrawing, kind of like what we did to start here. I don't think we need to do any underpainting, because underpainting is often where we're trying just to get the composition done, maybe to identify facial features that we're afraid might get covered up later. But I'm pretty confident that we can move right from underpainting to our background. So let's begin with our background. This is, of course, the painting we're about to do. And again, in the Dropbox folder, there's also this little cheat sheet. If you want to do today's painting on your own time and you don't want to watch, right? You can download this, and it gives you a little bit of an idea. So the first step here, we've already done steps 1 and 2. So now we're going to do our background. And I like starting in the background because then I can move to the foreground and kind of overlap colors just a little bit to get really nice seamless quality. Although this is not necessarily the way that he painted this painting, as we'll talk about here. So our first step for the sky is we want like a cool blue, and we always want our cool colors in the background because cool colors appear to recede, and we want our warm colors in the foreground. So this this cool blue also has a little bit of yellow in it. So let's start mixing this paint. So I'm going to take some white, because I know I'm going to need lots of that for today's painting. There's a lot of white in all those colors he's using. And here's my cool blue. And I'm starting out with just a little bit of it, because I know like that's already too dark, too intense. So I want to lighten that up even more. Let's put some more white in here. That's pretty close. I'm also just going to take a tiny bit of yellow, right? And you can see, when I say a tiny bit, I'm saying like that's what, maybe 5 grains of salt, right? And mix that in there. That's just going to give a very, very subtle greenish, kind of slight teal quality to this color. And I'm going to paint this in the background here. And I don't mind if I paint over those clouds a little bit, that's okay. And you know, now that I've got that paint on here, maybe it's still a little bit dark. It could be a little bit lighter, perhaps. But I'm not going to focus on making it perfect, because I don't know yet. So now I'm also going to take a little bit more white. I'm going to paint this into the bottom here and just kind of blend that up. So this really only works if your paint is still wet, right? Once it starts drying, it becomes really hard to do something like that. And that's pretty subtle. At least on camera, it looks really subtle. I can see it a little bit more clearly on my side of things. But again, I'm not going to spend too much more time than that getting that correct, quote unquote, because it's possible that I might have to repaint that sky. So, oops, that's maybe too much white. Let's get rid of some of that. Yeah, and maybe my cloud's a little bit different, so I'm just going to change the shape of that cloud. I don't want that big ridge of textures. Just wipe that away. So, you know, one of the things, oops, let's get to, one of the things, you know, we've done lots of paintings of that have clouds in the sky in the past, and often, you know, when I'm painting clouds, I make a point of sort of softening the edges. Now, the way that Lawren Harris painted, well, this is sort of marks almost like the transition point into a bit more of his more mature landscape paintings. Is there's more of like a solidity to these shapes as time goes on and on and on. So it's possible to leave that as a fairly rigid kind of outline. If you want to kind of soften it up, though, you could take a little brush and just go around those edges. And this is a dry brush, so I'm just sort of smudging those edges out a little bit. Just kind of maybe getting the hard, sharp outside edges down So it's just a little bit softer. Blending that into the background. All right, let's get a bit more white. Oops. Okay. I am just going to take a bit more of my paint from my sky and just touch that up. Yeah, that's good enough for right now. Okay. So there's our sky. Now the next thing we're going to do is our mountains, and so let's just kind of take a look at our cheat sheet again. Well, actually, you know what I did in my thing? I talked about maybe the reflections in the water. Maybe, you know what, we can do that right now. Since I've got all this paint already mixed here, I'm going to paint just put a bit of that paint down here. Now, yes, this is a bit more, this is a cool blue, and we're putting it in the foreground. But we can always modify anything like this. And they're not hard and fast rules. And, you know, these types of like reflections and things also kind of play havoc on that type of a situation. Okay. Wow, there's a lot of people here. Where do we end off? There's Greg is there. M. Taylor says, difficult to pick one favorite Canadian artist. Tom Thompson, Emily Carr, Kent Monkman, who's a contemporary artist. I love Kent Monkman's art. There's John. Says hello. There's Deborah. Hi, Deborah. Rick and I are late. You guys are doing music lessons with the kids, so you're looking forward to doing this painting. That's great. And there's Becca. Becca says, I love all the artists' work from the group of 7. I find their work absolutely fascinating. Presently, I follow Linny Wood, Nicholas Martin, and Robert McAfee. Interesting. I'm not aware. Those, I guess, must be Canadian artists. Blue Dog says, one of my favorite Canadian artists is Tom Thompson, but I like most of the group of 7 paintings. And there's Lolly joining us from the UK as well. Hi, Lolly. And there's Kathy. Wow, cool. I'm just really quickly trying to scan this before I move on. Okay, so let's move on to the mountains next here. So the first thing we're going to want to do for, well, yeah, we'll do the mountains. Should I can call that my foreground? Yeah, no, we'll keep this in the background. I'm just thinking of how to divide up my intertitles here. Okay, so to make our to make these mountains that are in the background, let's just take a look. Is what I want to do is I actually want to mix a gray, because we're going to mix that gray into some of these colors here to give a little bit more atmosphere and nuance to these mountains. So let's mix a gray. So to start, we want to mix a black. So I'm going to take my cool yellow and my cool blue. Let's get a bit more of that. And my warm red. So we're mixing those three colors together. My cool yellow, my cool blue, and my warm red. Because those three colors in combination together, if you get about roughly, equal thirds of them, will basically cancel each other out, and they're pulling each color into what we call the neutral core. Now, you can see right now that color is kind of brown. So let's just sort of do a quick little color mixing theory here. So what we did is we took our warm red, our cool blue, and cool yellow. So one thing you can do is you can mix a cool green, a really saturated green, and opposite that green on the color wheel is our warm red. So what that does is by mixing that color in here, we're pulling that green towards the red. And if we added enough red back in there, gallons of it, it eventually would return back to warm red, right? So we're pulling that in here, and basically it's going to cancel out the coolness and the saturation of that green. So if it's a little bit brown, as mine is, what that tells me is I probably have, it's obviously mostly red and yellow, but I need a lot more blue because I'm kind of maybe over here now. I need the blue to pull it into the middle. If your color is still too green, we need more red. If your color goes a little bit purple, then we've probably got enough warm red and cool blue. We need some yellow to pull that purple into the neutral core. So, if I got this brown, let's add more blue. Looks like it's still a little bit brownish. Let's put more blue in there. Getting pretty close. And it can be really hard to tell when you're mixing a color that's this dark, how well it's turned out. We just need a little bit more blue. So the secret to determining how close of a black you got is to mix a little bit of white into it, which I'm about to do here in a second. So I want to mix that all nice together. So let's just take a little bit of white and let's put that to the side and mix it. That's pretty good. Let's take a little bit more white. That's a really pretty close to a neutral gray. Again, if I mix this and it looked a little bit brown, then I'd add a little bit more blue. If it looked a little bit more green, I'd add a bit more red. If it looked a little bit purple, we'd add a little bit more yellow to it. But I think that's good enough for government work, as my grandfather used to say. So, let's make this much more of a subtle gray. Or a lighter gray, I mean. So that's good, but if I look at my painting, it's still way, way too dark. Right? I mean, maybe that color gets kind of close to that area right here. In fact, while I've got this color on my brush, let's just paint with it. This is not quite the color I want, because I do want something that's a little bit more brown in here. But I'm just going to put it in here for right now. Just added a bit more white into this one here. And maybe I'm just taking a little bit more white each time. let's go even further. So I'm actually probably just going to take this paint and just let's mix it right over here. So I'm going to take my gray, mix it into this cool blue. I think it still needs to be much more light, much lighter. You can see it's harder to lighten a color than it is to darken a color. I have a feeling that's still going to be too dark. But you know what? I'm not too concerned about getting it perfect at this stage. I just want to fill in color as quickly as possible. So, you know what? I'm going to add a little bit more blue in here. Yeah, it still needs a bit more white. So you can see I'm lightening as I go further back into space, or darkening it as you're getting closer, because the further something gets, the sort of more atmosphere we would expect to see on that object, right? A faraway mountain is going to be more and more muted of colors as it recedes into the background. So I'm not really worried about getting these the right color in the quote-unquote right place. I'm mostly just sort of putting some paint, almost randomly into place here, that I can then put other colors and kind of almost mix this into it. So now let's take a bit more cool blue. So I'm not worried about all these little subtle details there. We'll get to all of that. You know, as I'm painting this, I'm not really even looking too much at the original here and trying to get the colors to match up. Because what I would like to happen is for, as I paint on this, to kind of build up a few different layers here. So, actually, now I'm going to go the other way. I'm just going to now, maybe I'm going to wipe off some of this excess paint. And just go right into my white here. Take a little bit of gray. So this is going to be like snow on the mountain at one point, eventually. But I'm not yet ready to kind of fully define those spaces. So these are just sort of like placeholder. Now, as I go, just clean this brush off. What I want to do is start to get a little bit more of a purpley quality. So as we go closer and closer towards the foreground, I'm going to add a little bit of purple, or sorry, a little bit of this warm red in here. It's going to make it go a little bit more purpley. Okay, there we go. Now this isn't going to get me the most saturated purple. I want a cooler purple. So that's why I'm using cool red and cool blue. Okay. Keep on going here. Let's maybe add just a little bit more color to make this just a little bit more intense. See that color? Now all of a sudden it seems like much closer to us than these, right? Because it's more saturated of a color. Okay, now I'm going to take a little bit of my warm blue now. Because now I'm starting to move closer into our foreground. So I'm going to take this warm blue, put that into this color. Yeah, again, it's not the exact right color I want yet. But this is just my first pass on this part of the painting here. Okay. I guess I should have done a little bit of the reflections in the water, so let's just kind of come back down here. That's too dark. So I'm just putting a bit of these warmer colors underneath. So when I eventually put some cooler colors back on top of this, it's going to keep it a little bit warmer because I want that to sit forward. Okay. So Pascal says, hi, just tuned in. Is it me or is that has a black screen? It's okay, but it's dark. I don't know. You guys have a dark screen on YouTube. That's weird. Well, I appreciate trying to see if you could figure out what was going on, because sometimes stuff does happen and I don't realize it on my end. So glad it sorted itself out. Pascal says, my favorite Canadian artists, of course, the Impressionists. My favorite Canadian artists, of course, Impressionists. Helen McNichol, Marc Aurèle Lefroy, Suzanne Coté. Is it Helen McNichol or Marion Nichol? Maybe there's a Helen McNichol. I know there's a famous Marion Nichol. Or is it Helen McNichol? I thought it was Marion. Our lecture hall at the Alberta College of Art was the Marion Nichol. Delors says, Lawren Harris, along with A.Y. Jackson and Arthur Wismer, were the ones that started the Federation of Canadian Artists here in Vancouver in 1941. Lolly says, I'm really enjoying these Group of 7 classes lately. I was totally unfamiliar with the Group of 7 before finding this channel, and I have loved learning about these amazing artists. That is cool. That's great. Okay. So let's go to another... okay. So we've got our background, I think just the first pass. It's not perfect yet, but the colors are kind of, you know, roughly there. We're in the ballpark. So now we're going to move to our foreground, which is, you know, the water at the bottom, as well as the trees and the hill that sits in front of the mountain. So let's move on. Let's, in fact, we can just look at our cheat sheet again that I created. So here's our kind of the middle ground areas and then foreground in below. So we've already done a little bit of things. We mixed this gray and we painted some of that snow up top there. We started with some of the cool purple and then we just did some warm purple, the gray in the hill. And now this is where we're at, the teal. All right, so that's what we're going to be up to next if you're following along on the cheat sheet. So let's put those together. So again, I'm going to use a bit of a cooler color, and we can modify it later, but I'm going to take my cool blue, and let's put it over here. Cool yellow. Let's get all that paint off. So you see I keep moving over because I want to lighten it up, make it a little bit more yellow, and there's still too much paint in my brush. So rather than trying to just keep on adding yellow to this, I'm just mixing it anew a little bit to the side there. I'm now going to add a little bit of white into this color. Because it's very transparent, so in fact, I'm just going to add a bit more white in there. So let's just add more white. Which I'm going to, since I'm adding more white in there, I'm actually going to darken it a little bit. Yeah, you know, I'm just going to go right across here. No, let's just do this too. Okay. I'm going to put a bit of this in this reflection as well. I'm going to mute that, or maybe it's going to be muted enough, because I'm definitely going to have to put a second coat on top of that area. Let's go for a bit more of a teal. I'm going to take my gray, a little bit more blue. So these aren't necessarily the right like this color is not really the right color there, but I'm going to have to paint a darker color over top of it. So it's going to be easier if there's something already darker. That's going to make the darker color darker if there's something already dark-ish underneath it. So I'm just sort of putting that there, and then I'll paint over it later. This reflection here, similar thing here. There's some gray, but maybe more white in that color. Let's take some of our teal, or cold blue, I mean. I can put that color. Looks like I need a bit more white. Maybe that was too much white. A bunch more white here. Let's make that a little bit darker. Again, that's not the right color, but it doesn't bother me. You know, if I was painting with oil paints, I might be a little bit more determined to mix the quote-unquote proper color and put it in the quote-unquote proper place. But with acrylics, because it just dries so quickly, I'm always happy to kind of build up a little bit of surface here by putting maybe the quote-unquote wrong color in certain places just to get something started. Because right now we're starting to kind of block out increasingly more and more of that bright yellow, which really affects the way we see the overall painting. And it can make it hard to mix the right color, because you might be like, oh, it looks good on my palette, I put it here, it doesn't look right, and then you're modifying. Once we get this all filled up and that yellow becomes less pervasive, then we can kind of fine-tune and get much closer. So the question, like, why would we even bother then putting that warm yellow then if it's a distraction and it makes it harder? Well, part of it for me is that it forces me to not worry so much about mixing the right color. Because if there's this really intense color that's kind of affecting the way all the colors look, then it's like, well, let's just get stuff there and not worry about getting it perfect, because the chances it's going to be perfect are very low. So let's just slather on the paint. Pascal says, it is Helen McNichol. Helen indeed. Discovered them at National Gallery of Canada. Maybe there's a sister, Marion. Okay. So next up, what I want to do is continue to, I want to paint some of these purples in here. So to get that more intense purple, I'm going to take my cool red and my warm blue, and now we're going to get something much more intense. And I think we want something at first a little bit more on the magenta side of things. And I'm going to paint that right in here. Look at that. Gorgeous. And it works really well with the warm yellow that I had painted there earlier. Really kind of complements that. Blends in there perfectly. It's kind of got this pretty intense quality. I do see a little bit of something back here, so I'm going to paint that in there. Other than that, looks like we do have maybe a bit of, not white, a bit of gray. A little bit more blue in that color as we come. Okay. So now we're just going to paint some of these trees that are in the foreground. I guess I'll clean my brush. And there's Heidi there. Hi, Heidi. Oh, and Paula there. Huh. I mean, there was a moment for about 5 seconds where the lights flickered on and off. Maybe that explains why people were saying it was a little dark. Okay. So now what I want to do is I want to mix some darker trees. So I'm actually going to use my warm blue. I'm going to mix that into this cool green that I had here. Because that's going to give me a really dark color. And I want to start with a darker color, and then I might lighten things up a little bit as we go here. And really, I probably should start using a smaller brush at this point, but I'm just going to plow ahead. And then I'm just going to let's just take some of this white wherever we got it. Just a little bit of gray, just using up a little bit of extra stuff. A little bit too light, so let's just add a bit more. That's okay, let's just paint that. Paint it in, we'll worry about it again in a little bit. Okay. So that's, that's the end of that first pass, or first pass of our foreground and background. And for some people, this might be good enough to end on. You might be more than happy enough if you can get to this place. And if you can, and this is one of the first paintings you ever made, that would be a huge achievement. That would be really cool. I am going to put I'm going to put more work into it so we can kind of refine this. I'm going to start using smaller and smaller brushes. But, especially if I was on location, like I imagine probably Lawren Harris was when he made this painting, and he's just sitting maybe in a canoe or on a rock or a log on the far shore making this painting, if you were able to do this in about an hour and a half and get to this point, this would be good enough for a sketch that you would then take back to your studio and transform into a more elaborate finished painting, and often much larger as well. So let's go back to our background. So our next step here is to finish off the background, and then we're going to finish off the foreground after that, and then we'll be getting close to finishing. So really what I'm looking for here is to think like what, if anything, needs to be done in the background. So let's look at them side by side and think here. So a few things I want to do is add a little bit more white onto my cloud up there. I want to, refine my mountains here, adding some highlights and maybe even darkening in just a few places. Same sort of things here. I mean, this one's getting closer to completion in this area, and then obviously reflections. Now, one thing you see in the mountain here is that's all of that little brown. That is actually probably from the Imprimatura that he would have put down there originally, or it might just be the raw canvas in that place. So I think it would still be kind of nice if we try to recreate a little bit of that. So I'm going to take my warm yellow and my warm blue, my warm red. I'm going to create a little bit of a brown here. Then I'm going to add some white to it. Otherwise it might just be a little intense. Okay. So I'm going to take that. And I'm just going to kind of fake this out a little bit. Few little spots. In fact, that might be a little bit much. I think I need to add a little bit more white in there. Now, you don't have to do this at all. This is pretty silly to focus on little details like this, but you know, it's kind of, it is a part of the painting, and if there's someone who wants to know how I would have done that or what these things are, I'm just going to add them. It does, I think, give a little bit of the look of rocks that might be a little bit exposed to the, you know, that aren't covered in ice and snow. And so I think that is something that he's using deliberately in this painting to kind of give it a little bit of texture. Now he's also, if we look at the side of this mountain, that's some orange that he's putting in there that I'm pretty sure, I mean, it's possible that was the wood, but it looks a little bit different and a little bit brighter. So I'm just gonna, let's make that separately here. A little bit of white in there to make it pop a bit more. It might have to come back here. and add a bit of that afterwards. I like this, kind of the sunlight hitting some of these trees here. I think that's a really nice touch. So let's just zoom back out just so you can see how all that looks. Right, it does make quite the difference, right? It does kind of give it just a weird little bit of detail that it had lacked before, and that light on those, and it's not going to be the final thing I do there, but it just kind of brightens up that area. Paul says, hi, I was late and I'm catching up. Okay. Let me just... let's save that brown. Sometimes if I have a big glob of paint, I'm like, should I wipe this off? Maybe let's just put it back on the palette, because you never know. There were 17 new people over the course of this, well, more than that, but one day, a couple days ago, there were 17 new people that joined the Facebook group over just a couple of days. Like, whoa, that's incredible. Where did all those people come from? So welcome to all those new folks. That's incredible. So let's now kind of go in and just start to refine this. And I'm going to start using a much smaller brush to kind of get into some of these details. So I think I need a little bit more of my warm blue. And let's take some of this gray. And you can see now I've got like all of this paint that was there before, and I'm kind of mixing into this paint, and it's kind of a mess. I like that personally. I like when my palette starts to kind of get a little bit messy. Let's see, is this too dark? Oh, actually, no, that's fine. Here I was lightening and lightening and lightening it, and it turned out it wasn't so bad after all. Now that is too light, or too dark, so I'll lighten it up again, kind of, so, you know, it's a little bit of back and forth. Let's zoom in here. So this is just white with some gray and my cool blue. You know, there's a few other little weird colors mixed in here. But it's fun kind of now going... So this is why it's nice to do the background first and then come and clean it up with this. Because now I get these nice sharp lines as they overlap a little bit. Now again, I have zero interest in making this a perfect reproduction, so I'm not going to focus too much on getting the right shapes in the mountain. I'm just going to sort of riff off of it a little bit and play, as I think you should do as well. I'm going to come in and use a little bit more purpley color eventually here, but I'm just going to, while I've got this color mixed, I'm going to continue using it elsewhere in the painting. Okay, let's do one where we got a lot more cool blue in here. Need some more white. So the paintbrush is sort of kind of getting accumulated with paint, and I find that really frustrating to paint with, so just wipe that off. I'm going to take this paint and just mix that off to the side. I think I want something a little bit less gray in there. to this side. See, now that there's like a base layer of paint in there, I don't have to worry about, you know, being so precise. I can let little gaps of paint kind of show through, of darker colors or lighter colors underneath, whatever it might happen to be. I just find that very liberating. Okay, let's just look at this other mountain here. There's a little bit of the same kind of bluey color. And I think that's okay. So now what I want to do is I'm just going to take my white. I don't mind if it's got a little bit of blue or anything else in it, but I'm just going to take that white. Okay, I'm going to start on my left. If I want, I can also just quickly go in and maybe smooth some edges out a little bit. If I found the way that I painted that to be a little bit too sharp. And then just to kind of tidy things back up, I just take a color and maybe go back and kind of touch up things, maybe. It's a little bit of a back and forth, right? Okay, let's do one with, it's got a little bit more purple in it. A very subtle amount of purple. Is that a good idea to put that purple there? Not really there, but I might just take that back out. Let's go to this other mountain now. And I think some of the similar color I was just using can be applied right here. In fact, maybe it could be just a bit darker. I'm just going to take a little bit of my black, bring that in here just to make sure it sits in front of the other mountain. Okay. Let's take a bit of that blue. Actually, let's do that right here. And then let's just take our white. You know, maybe just before I move on completely back here, I'm just going to also go back to my cloud. Let's take a bit more white. I'm going to mix a tiny bit of gray into this. Okay. Let's keep on moving to these hills over here on the left. I take my cool blue and cool red, mix a kind of cool purple. Let's bring in some gray into this mixture. It's a little bit too dark. Let's add just a bit more white. Oh, I think it should. That was a little bit too purpley. Let's make it just a bit more bluish. And as I go here, I am going to add just a little bit more cold red in there, purple it up. Go back to my gray. It's a little bit too dark. One thing you can also notice is a lot more texture in mine, or at least it appears that way, you know, based on the original, which is fairly low quality, so it's hard to really judge. But the one thing with acrylic paint is as I paint, the texture is going to level down. Acrylic painting will self-level, as they would say. So even if I've got a lot of texture on there, it's likely a lot of that texture will disappear as the painting dries. So I don't have to be too concerned about that. I might have done that a bit dark. But you know what? I'm just going to keep moving forward. It does mean that if I've gone too dark here, everything in front of it's going to have to be dark. Or sorry, if I've gone... Yeah, if this is too dark, then things in front of it will also have to get darker to compensate. So, you know, if I want to continue that gray, I'm going to have to make it a darker gray. Oh, maybe that's supposed to be lighter. Well, let's mix. I'm just smudging paint around there before it dries. Now I'm going to go into my warmer blue and put this I'm going to put that warmer blue, as well as maybe just take a bit of my black. Too much. I think I need to zoom out here to see how things are progressing. Okay, so now I can see a little bit more clearly. Let's take some of our cool red, warm blue. I'm going to lighten that up a bit, the interior. Might go back into that later on, but rather than just fiddling with that endlessly, I'm going to move on. Let's get to... let's first mix this kind of green. So my cool blue and cool yellow. You know what, actually, rather than, I'm gonna, one second here, let's... Oop, not 3, we want 2. Okay, so now that we've got the background pretty well established, I'm pretty happy with the sky, the clouds, the mountains. So now I want to do the hills that are in front of the mountains, and we're getting closer and closer to wrapping the painting up. Okay, so... let's see. So because I painted this grass there before with some white underneath, now this color without any white just glides right on top of it. And it is much more luminous than it otherwise would have been. I mean, it would have looked like what we had there before, which was kind of a little bit, a little muted because we had put so much white into that paint to help make it pop. see. Oh, the White Wasabi says, I'm back. It's my birthday in a couple days. That's exciting. John's here. John says, my abstract oil is done yesterday and has been varnished and to dry. Have you seen it, Ace? Is it on the Facebook group? I'm not sure. John says, black, blue, navy, warm color as a background. There's a green, blue, red, a bit yellow, I think. That's all 4 gradations, shade, midtone. Interesting. Yeah, I'll have to check it out. I don't remember seeing it on the Facebook group over the past couple days. Maybe I missed it. So. Okay. Let's look at that color there. So that's kind of like a teal. Maybe we need a little bit more cool blue in here. And some black as well. Just a bit more cool blue for that mixture. It's a little bit too on the green side. Let's see how that fares. It's almost a bit too dark, hey? So let's just mix it again, just off to the side. So I'm just going to take a little bit of my cool blue. I'm actually going to take a bit of white in there too, which is going to take it maybe just a little bit more into a gray. And before I go too much further, I'm going to put a little bit of gray back in here. Need some more white. Things are starting to dry up there. How dark? That's still too light. Let's get more black in here. Let's darken it even more. And then I'm just going to take my that same color and bring it back over top of that wet paint just to kind of blend it a bit. Okay, maybe what should we do next? I'm gonna do this area right here. Let's take we got the cool blue, cool red. Mix that up good. Actually, it's a little bit, I want a little bit more of magenta in there, I think. Take more blue. It's definitely more intense than what he's got. But you know what? I kind of like it, so I might keep it. I could mute it with a bit of white. But let's just see. I'll just wait until a little bit further on in this painting, and maybe I'll be very happy with it as it is. Okay, let's zoom back out. That is a bit intense, little bit silly. Let's just take a bit of gray. Push that back. Maybe it could have been a bit darker, so let's just put a bit of black in here. Okay, and I think we can also use part of this for these trees that are going to be right down here too. Well, now that I look at it, definitely much greener. They look a little more purple when I was zoomed out, but maybe I could take that purple, mix it in with my green a bit here. My cool teal. Just trying to keep a little bit of variety here so that they're not all the same height and shape. Sometimes they form a little blob. Add a little bit of gray into some of them as they fade out over here. Mix in just a bit more black into a few of them. And then I'm just going to take this green that I had there. Ah, it's very watery. I didn't dry my brush, really. Let's do that again. Okay. I think I want to just create a few more little stripes in here of color. I can just take this same color, maybe mix it into my lighter green just to give that little bit of variety. Cool blue. What else do I want to do? Well, I guess let's start painting these trees in the foreground. So this time I'm going to take my warm blue and my warm yellow to get a warmer green. So this isn't the final color for these trees. I'm going to do some that are even darker. But this is kind of a pretty good start here. So just go right across. So this warmer green just immediately sits in front of all the other greens that we had so far, because warm colors will advance and cool colors will recede. I'm also just like he's done here, deliberately making these trees go in front of that purple will reinforce the fact that they are in front of that purple hill, right? So that helps kind of alleviate any confusion that people might have as to what is in front of what. What is this space? Like, we want to make it as clear and straightforward as possible, so that when people look at it, they're like, what? I'm a little confused as to what's going on. We don't want that to happen. We want it to be very straightforward. I mean, we want people to be, you know, I wrote my graduate thesis on the importance of mystery when it comes to art, but it doesn't mean mystery is different than confusion, right? So I'm just going to get more warm blue on my brush into this same green, which is going to make it much darker. Let's go back to the left here. So if the right side has that highlight, the darker side is going to have this warm blue in it. I'm not necessarily going to put it everywhere. But definitely as I go further to the right, in fact, I'm going to start now putting a bit of black into this color here. Because this right side of the painting is definitely in the shadowy area. Okay. Let's back out here. So next I want to put that line on the separating the water from the shore. So where's that line gonna go? Up here? Okay. Back to my purple here. Okay, so now really what's left is this area down on the bottom. Potentially. I mean, I could see maybe a few little things I want to touch up on, but I want this reflection. I'm mostly, well, I probably want to focus on the reflection here, or the water, and then the tree reflection after. So, and it's, you know, again, it's really interesting because when I painted this before, I remember thinking that's definitely too dark, I'm gonna have to lighten it. Now I look at it, and because of what I've done elsewhere in the painting, this actually needs to get darker, right? And often that happens, right? You know, again, that's why it's not worth your time to try to get it right off the beginning, because it's entirely possible that what's right at one point becomes wrong later. I'm just going to take a bit of warm blue in here. So this is my cool blue, cool yellow, and actually put a little bit of warm blue in there as well. And so it's interesting because that color that I just put down here looks like it's very similar to the color I want on the other side of the painting, but maybe just a little bit more white into it. Now ideally these shapes kind of mirror each other a little bit, but there's a certain amount of forgiveness to it, because depending on how, unless these trees are right next to one another on a perfect line, they're not going to create a perfect reproduction here. If a tree is a little bit further back, it's going to actually appear shorter, etc. So the White Wasabi says the template printout things are confusing. What's confusing about the template? They're intended just to get the sketch in place, and then after that it's really not useful. Right? So I'm not really sure. Maybe tell me what you're finding confusing about it, so I can help sort that out for you. You say it's confusing to find the correct one. Well, you can look again at the very beginning of the episode. I show exactly how to find it, and I show it on camera. So if you just watch, if you jump back to that part of the video, you can scroll to it and see if you can find. That might really help you find the file. If that's, as well as on the Facebook group, there's a direct link to the exact folder. So you don't even have to find it. You just go to the Facebook group for today's episode, click on it, and you'll see that there's the template right there. The order is maybe a little bit confusing. I can appreciate that because they have... I didn't think I'd be here 2 years later when I began this, continuing these episodes. So I can appreciate, you know, it sort of kind of kept expanding beyond my original plan, which is fine, but it definitely has, you know, it's one of those things. I kind of started it, it's like, if I change it now, then anyone watching an episode after will find it really difficult because all the links won't work and it'll just be a mess. And so it's like, I thought I would do maybe 20 or 30 episodes and move on with my life, and here I am years later still doing it. So at some point I might, once I've maybe done my book, maybe I'll go in and kind of update all the links and reorganize it and create a spreadsheet, and but that's something for the future me to worry about. Made a little boo-boo there. Let's just wipe that away as quickly as possible. It helps to have a clean rag when you're fixing your mistakes. Okay, so now let's move on to the reflections. So down here, I'm going to take some of my warm blue and white. Do we have any cool blue left? I keep putting more cool blue in here. So I'm just going to take a bit of cool blue, mix that into that same mixture. Just so I can have a... Whoa, that's too much. A bit more white. Obviously my reflections are a little bit different than his, just because I'm having a little bit of fun playing here. Let's get that blue and white. I want a little bit of cool blue and a little bit of warm blue together so that I can get a bit more of like a cobalt blue, which is kind of exists in between the two blues that I've got. Okay, let's just add a little variation in here to give a little variety in that water, just something with a little bit more. Okay, getting close here. Okay, so we're very close to being done. I think it's just time to do a little bit of finishing touches. And, you know, I mean, arguably I could be done, but I think I just want to do a little bit. Okay. So let's just look at them side by side. He's definitely, there's a little bit more of those little brown specks in here. Should I do a little bit of that? Yeah, okay, remember when I said instead of wiping my paintbrush off on the cloth, I saved a little bit of that brown that was on there? This is where it comes in handy. Now, he didn't do this, but I feel like there would be reflection in the water from those trees, so I'm going to add those little details there. Not too many of them, and not all of them. On some of these trees, I'm just going to take some warm red right out of the, warm yellow right out of the tube, and put these on top of these reflections. Or not reflections, sorry, highlights, I mean. Up here, that's going to make them really glow with warmth. Maybe not so much on this side, because I think that's a little bit in shadow. Do I want to fix that? Let's see. Line might need to just be refined a bit there. It's too dark. Let's lighten that up. So I'm just doing that to create a difference between those two spaces and those two little hills. Okay, I think that's probably good enough, right? So Hudson. Hi, Hudson. Hudson says Ken Danby. We did do a Ken Danby painting. We did his most famous painting years ago. So check that out. There's the Ken Danby. It's called In the Crease. It's a very famous painting of a goaltender, hockey goaltender. Paul says maybe it's easier if you put the folder number on the printout. I think that would make things more complicated, because if I change it, then I got to change all of the file numbers. So this may not be perfect, but I think it's the system I've got right now, and I think I'm going to keep it. Okay, so but I appreciate the suggestions. They're great suggestions, and keep them coming. Okay, so let's take a look at the two paintings side by side and do a little breakdown and see how well I did, and then you can decide if you're just watching the video for the first time and you just jumped here, you can see, well, is it worth doing this painting? Did he do it well enough for me to want to try to attempt it? Consider liking, subscribing, hitting the notification bell so you know when future videos are coming up. Join the Facebook group. So there is a private Facebook group. There's a link to that in the description below. Join the group, upload a copy of your painting to the Facebook group. Next week, I'm going to take a look at all the great art that you've posted there, and I'm going to give some free feedback. Even if it's not a painting you did in class, but something you've been doing on your own, join the Facebook group so that you can participate in that free activity. Now, if you want to support the channel with a small donation, consider leaving $1 through PayPal or the YouTube Super Chat here, directly through YouTube, or contact me through my email, which is on my website, and you contact me through the Facebook group once you join it. So lots of different ways to help support the channel, and all of this, everything you see around here, is through your generous support. So, the painting that we did, how does it compare to my version? Wow, I see I see definitely a little more orange over here. I think I got the colors pretty close. And as always, my colors tend to be a little bit more saturated, just because that's something that I like about painting. I just like bright colors. So let's just zoom in. So we got the clouds in the sky. Now, you'll notice that the way that I did my mountain is definitely very different. I really took a lot of liberties with the kind of texture of the mountain. And I encourage you to do the same as well. Don't worry about making it perfect. Don't worry about if you got 4 or 5 things up here. Who cares, right? As long as you're having fun, as long as you're playing with the colors and you're learning a little bit about mixing paint. So I put all those little brown spots there, which are intended to kind of mimic what I think is just the bare, probably wood panel that he's painting on top of. And so it's a little bit different, especially when we get up close. But I think when we back out, it works totally fine. Going to go a little bit back here. And as I went, I actually got this. I think originally I had it very close to what we see on the left, but as I painted, I kind of darkened it in just a little bit, which forced everything else to get a little bit darker and more saturated as I moved forward. But I think it's okay, especially if we go now, just look at this other hill here. That's definitely way more purple than was in the original. You know, I think it's okay. I probably could have put a little... I think that was one of the last things I did, is put that little bit more purple in there. And it was mostly just because this one down here seemed really dark, and that one here seemed much lighter. And rather than trying to get it exactly what you see on the screen, I was just deciding, okay, I need to bridge this gap, and the color that is between my colors, it was that color, as I saw it. All right. Yeah, maybe some of this could be a bit darker. I don't think I'm going to touch it, though. I think it's fine. Those trees. He has more trees there, more tightly packed in, but... yeah, I think my green is maybe a little bit brighter than his, but not a big deal, I don't think, right? Got a little bit more room down there. Some of this in the reflection is also a little bit different. I put a little bit more warm blue in there than he had. Let's bring that down. I also really amped up the reflections on, or not the reflect, I keep saying reflections, the highlights on those trees of the sun, which is coming in from the left and hitting those trees. And I just made them a little bit more intense. I put some warm yellow right out of the tube in those places. And I like it. It might be a little bit over the top, but I don't mind being a little over the top. And, you know, again, I put more of that same bright color right there, that bright orange on the mountain. Because I also really think orange and purple complement each other quite well. They're almost opposite one another on the color wheel, and so there's a really nice tension there that they create. So again, not exactly the same, but that's never really my intention anyway. So yeah, not bad for a few hours worth of work. Basically, what, about 3 hours of painting, and that's where we got to. And I feel happy about enough with this that if I wanted to hang it in my living room, I would feel pretty proud if somebody walked in and saw that. And I think if you got anywhere near this, you should feel super proud, especially if this is one of the first paintings you've ever done. Okay. Thank you, everyone, for painting along with me. I can't wait to see what you created today, whether it was a painting by one of Canada's greatest artists, Lawren Harris, or something that you've created inspired by the world around you. I think just making art is doing the world a great service. I think it's a little bit of community service that you've created, and it's bettering yourself, helping your brain, helping your memory. Congratulations if you made it this far. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you next week. We're going to be looking at Mary Brocmond, one of the greatest Impressionist painters of all time, who again happens to be a woman, and one of the so-called like 3 great women of Impressionism. And we've looked at 2 already, so now we're finishing that trifecta next week. I'm looking forward. We're going to be painting a great. A really nice, I think it's a portrait of hers we're doing. I'm trying to remember which one we're doing, but anyway, we'll see you all next week. Enjoy the rest of your night. Good night, everybody.